Break Group Education Fund is dedicated to educating the public and professionals in our business with fact-based information, featuring the experts in our profession so that we might all do a better job of helping college athletes realize the promise of an educational degree and becoming all they can be as students and athletes and the athletics administrators who are managing these programs. So we welcome you to our 50th webinar. Thank you to all of our panelists for their time, expertise, and ideas, and to all of you attending. Webinars provide us with the opportunity to share new ideas, recalibrate our thinking on issues, and get up to date on important topics. We are so pleased to have you join us. Lastly, before you meet our moderator and panelists, I just want to emphasize that our speakers are expressing their own opinions and not the opinions of the organizations in which they are employed or are members, unless they make that distinction in their remarks. Now, I'm honored to introduce the moderator of today's program. Please meet Dr. Kenneth Shropshire, the David W. Houck Professor Emeritus and Emeritus Professor of Africana Studies at Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania, and also a nationally recognized author, attorney, consultant, and educator. All yours, Ken.
Thanks, Julie. I'm happy to have the opportunity to do this, and we've got a great cast to take us through these issues, covering virtually every aspect of the college landscape in terms of levels of involvement on this important issue. So you've got their bios, et cetera, in advance as you registered for this. But let me just do a quick kind of by title intro, and then we'll get right into the conversation. So Sandy Hatfield Clubb is the president of the Pictor Group, former athletic director at Drake. Oliver Luck, the president of the Palmetto Trust Company and chairman of Altia Sports Partners. He's a former athletic director at West Virginia University. Tiffany Tucker, the director of athletics, physical education, and recreation at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. And Erlise Wagner, the deputy athletic director and senior woman athletic administrator at Morgan State University. So welcome everybody, and thank you for taking the time to do this. The first thing I thought about is really how do we zero in on how this thing is working, and how do we help people to understand the steps that they might take to have success in this space, especially in the mode that Drake is the Drake Group is focused on in terms of success of students who happen to be athletes. I mean, it's such a bad word to say student athletes now, so I'm like self-conscious in saying that anymore. So we'll learn from this collective on the latest thinking on this, and much of their thinking will be questions that will confirm that questions should be had in this moment. So let's start off with a quick level set on the House settlement. I think this kind of audience, I think most of us know what's going on in terms of the landscape we're in. But from each of you, let's just go around, and Sandy, I'll start off with you. You're on kind of the top left of my screen, so it makes it easy for me. But just maybe 30, 40 seconds on what are the high level issues that athletic departments are dealing with in this new atmosphere. And now that we've got this little bit of start time, what are the issues that are there? And in some ways, as I think about, compared to what we thought would be there, just high level. We'll get into more detail as we go through.
Yeah, so and first of all, I should have figured out how to get on the screen differently, but here I go. So without getting into the detail of, what's happening, NIL, House settlement, new rules, that kind of thing, I would say for leaders in Division I, the number one thing they're dealing with is chaos, right? It's new, it's different. We're in the middle of a paradigm shift in college athletics. And I believe that we're in that point in time where things have changed and the future is unknown. And so really what people are facing is new, right? So how do we put new ideas together? How do we conceptualize what the future looks like? How do we protect Olympic sports? How do we lean in and provide or not compensation to athletes through revenue share and those types of things? How do we readdress, rebalance what the benefits are to the athletes the institution, and where do all of our sports fit in there. So I think the biggest thing are leadership challenges in knowing how to be poised, patient, listeners, learners, as this new paradigm of college sports is going to be on the future, and the people who are sitting in it right now get a chance to shape what that looks like.
Okay, knowing how to lead in these kinds of moments and dealing with the turmoil that exists. Or at least you pop up next for me. Tell us about what's happening Morgan State specifically in terms of the high level issues that you're dealing with, what's hot on the plate, and then your view of what's out there more broadly.
So I think, regardless of the level or classification of institution, I do agree with Sandy. You've got to be poised, but most importantly, be able to pivot. There's no set box, if you will, that everyone fits uniformly into. And so there aren't a lot of boundaries. So if you're resourceful, you've got a creative team, creative thinking, you're able to navigate this space um, on a rolling basis, but being able to pivot and shift your mindset. We were bound by very specific, strict guidelines and rules of what you can't do, when, how. And because of the flexibility that's been provided through the House settlement, and as we navigate the landscape moving forward, those boundaries are very fluid. Being able to pivot, taking a step back, working with a team that's creative, open-minded, being and still remaining in alignment with the leadership of the institution, because you still have to be in alignment with your leadership, but really being able to pivot in this space, because the landscape we knew in 24, 25 is definitely not the landscape 25, 26, and moving forward. Challenge comes up, and then you get an email, hey, we've got to look at this and review it because it doesn't fit neatly in our space or in our box, and spending a little extra time trying to figure out how to get to what we used to say, how to get to the yes, but how to get to a safe landing space that's going to be sustainable tomorrow.
Okay, thank you. And Tiffany, and when I think about UMBC, and if I think you're sitting in your seat in terms of leadership, I don't know what my first thoughts would have been. Well, we don't have football, so this will be different for us. So the same broad question, but has it been, how different has it been for you and those that don't have football?
Yeah, our it's so different for us because um the importance falls heavily on those non-revenue sports. Everyone's has their antennas up. How is this going to affect your track and fields, your men and women's lacrosses? And how do we fit now? Because there's, we can't throw away the idea of Title IX and what that means to higher ed and intercollegiate athletics. But for us, because we don't have a big vehicle like football, and we may not be managing the multimedia rights like your Power Four institutions, it's just a little bit more important for us to really get down in the weeds. The biggest thing is educating your campus so that our campus really, so our faculty members, our other staff members, my colleagues on campus understand that even though it looks like pay to play because they watch it on ESPN and they see one little bottom line and they take a little piece and they run with it. The importance of explaining to them that we're not navigating from the mission, vision, and values of our institution. However, this is a new way that athletics is compensating and enhancing athletics. So it's a lot of educating around dispelling the myths, but also making sure that my colleagues and our faculty members on campus know that we're not deviating from the ultimate plan of the university.
Oliver, we seems like we've talked about this forever in terms of consulting as before this happened, and then all of a sudden it really did happen. What remain the big issues, and maybe some of the surprise issues that came up after having this long journey of thinking about this moment arriving?
Well, I would pick up a couple of things. One, Sandy's right. This is a whole new leadership challenge for athletic and university leadership. I think Earlies is spot on. The rigid mindset doesn't work anymore. Everything's changed, and you have to approach it, based on what Tiffany said. Looking with some idea of the values that your institution have. I would say there's two things that really stand out to me. One is football, and call it big time football, whether that's all of FBS or the top 90 school, 80 school, top 100 schools. Football, to quote Elvis, has left the building. Football has become this monster sport. It generates virtually all the revenue. The networks used to say to the conferences, yeah, football is 80% of your of the TV money that's coming in. Men's basketball, the other chunk, maybe a little bit for women's basketball. But football has taken on a life of its own, as we're seeing right now. And I think there needs to be real thought given to, letting football do what it wants to do. Let it support those schools where football is king. But let's not have it ruin or affect too deeply the role that every other sport, every other athlete, student athlete is playing. The second thing is there's a fracturing because of football within, the NCAA, within Division I. Forget about D2, D3, but there's a complete fracturing. What Tiffany is facing without a football program, her challenges are much different than what up the road the University of Maryland is facing, or any of the power schools. And to have the same governance structure in this time of change, I think is real challenging for a lot of these athletic directors, because as Elise pointed out, they've got to be flexible. They've got to figure out where to find more money. They've got to do all these things that have historically been a part of their role, but now they're magnified because there's so much at stake.
So let's start getting to some more of the nuts and bolts of it. I guess the forefront issue with the House settlement for many was opting in or not. Are you gonna this is like the golfers talk about having the opportunity to play from the back tees. Are you gonna have the opportunity to spend 20.5 million on athletes in your department? So Earlies and Tiffany, let me hear from both of you. First on did people make the right decisions? I mean, you can speak about your places specifically or not, but as what you're seeing out there, people made the right decision on this, and what elements maybe did people not include in that decision making when you first had the opportunity to make the decision to spend more money? And Sandy, I'll ask you to chime in too if you got any comments after Elise and Tiffany. Elise, why don't we start off with you and Morgan State?
I was going to defer to Tiffany because she came off mute first.
No, I can jump in there if that's okay. We decided at UMBC we did not opt in. And it was a strategic decision as a university to not do that. Couple things. One, just infrastructure wasn't ready. I assumed the position here at UMBC in August of 2024. There were some key positions on our campus that had not been yet filled as well. So I didn't believe that we would have made the best decision for our institution to, one, be properly educated, and then two, to be able to put a plan in place to make that transition that fast, and not completely ruin or shake student athlete well-being. And let's not forget the hot button topic of student athlete mental health, because they're all, struggling in some form or fashion around two ideas of depression and anxiety. So adding this to it would have definitely rocked our department. So and then because of the flexibility of the NCAA, we did not have to opt in. So it was a decision to not have to do that. So why not take an opportunity to, one, expand on some of the things that we could do without having to push the opt-in button, which I think we were able to maximize Austin. We were able to maximize cost of attendance a little bit better, but also give us a runway so that we can properly transition into what opt-in will look like for UMBC. And even still, if when we opt in, it's still going to look different than maybe what Morgan State's doing or Towson is doing in our area, and definitely look different than the University of Maryland. But I do believe keeping up with the Joneses is definitely not going to be the way in which this thing is going to work for all of our institutions.
So it sounds like you have a better frame on making the decision going forward on whether or not you will opt in, and it is a possibility that you'll do so.
Yeah, it has to be a collaborative decision. It can't be the director of athletics saying we're going to opt in.
Right.
This has to come, we operate in a system. So this has to come from our regents. This has to come from our campus leadership, my president. We all have to be on board because this affects how we operate our university. We're definitely not spending $20.5 million, but every dollar counts when we talk about the mid-major space. The same way I share with our donors, whether you decide to invest $25,000 or $25, every dollar makes an impact at a mid-major institution. So we're going to think about those dollars the same way when we're spending them. So every dollar we have to issue out is definitely going to impact our institution. So we're going to be mindful on how we fiscally manage at our institution.
Elise, you had a little vamp time there.
Yeah. So I think our decision to opt in at Morgan State was more of a collaborative decision with President Wilson and Vice President Freeman Patton. On the base level of opting in for us was it gave us opportunity and it gave us flexibility outside of the rigid confines of the NCAA rules that we were working with. No, we're not offering 20 million in NIL, but it gives us a little more flexibility to pivot and offer financial resources to some of our students who ordinarily we would not have been able to under the confines and rigors of the rules that were in place if we chose not to opt in. It also gave some of our coaches a little more flexibility with their programming, with who they were recruiting, how they were recruiting, and recognizing that a lot of our student athletes at Morgan have financial challenges. And with opting in, it gave us more flexibility to address some of the financial challenges at a base level.
Right.
But then going beyond that, having different kinds of conversations with supporters of some of our programs that wanted to do more. They want to do more. They're trying to do more, and allowing the external staff, the coaching staff, to have those kinds of conversations with donors and supporters of our programs. But ultimately, the decision here was opting in gave us flexibility, more flexibility than we had under the current infrastructure. And it was a global conversation within President Wilson's leadership. Having that conversation, it wasn't just a decision made in a silo where, VP Freeman Patton said, well, I want to opt in, but it was more of a collaborative decision as to where the university stood with its core values, its mission, its strategic plan, and how athletics fits into that plan and the core values. And can Morgan be successful in this space if we opted in? And with the support being available from the campus community, from Dr. Wilson, the determination was made for us to opt in because we're in a better position to be successful with our student athlete experience and the success of our overall program if we opted in.
No, thank you. And I do want to come back, and I don't want to make you the HBCU spokesperson, but I do want people to think about what's the impact been on those institutions. So we'll come back to that. But Sandy and Oliver, what do you I guess if I could ask the question bluntly, I was like, is anybody like, oh, we made the wrong decision? What are you hearing out there in terms of the decision that was made to opt in or not?
So first of all, I want to say, kudos to Morgan State and UMBC to really dive in from a mission-driven position, right? I think that is the core of making that decision. If I could go back in time and be the czar of implementation on this, I would have there are only 5 conferences that are required to do this. And I would have had that go in place for 1 year. Nobody else could opt in for a year to just let the system settle in, like get it in place, so that institutions weren't having to make this decision in a matter of weeks, days, months. They didn't have time to stop and think long and explore as deeply as these two definitely did with their institutions. And I think that's to be said. As our firm has worked with conferences, institutions on exploring this decision, from an institutional perspective, there's some institutions not required to opt in that it makes a ton of sense. Like, it doesn't negatively impact them to opt in, although there's some added cost that's still unexplored. And others, I think, have been opting in that, it's not necessarily the easiest transition and impact. Having said that, only the power schools are the ones that, their business model is very, very different. And schools that are not in that power group are funded primarily by institutional fees and student fees. And so if you run the model on how we got to $22 million, if you run the model against those institutions' same revenue sources, you get to hundreds of thousands, not millions. So it's a really interesting time again. And I just want to keep going back to what both Elise and Tiffany referred to, and that is really knowing and understanding your institution and what it means to opt in and the impact on the institution as a whole.
Oliver?
Well, I would say, as a member of the board at my alma mater, West Virginia, and all the similar schools, the ones we'll be watching on TV this evening or this weekend with all the big football games, it was a very easy decision to opt in. Show me a president or a board chair who would say, "Oh no, we don't really want to compete at the highest level. We're quite not good enough to do that." Right? So it was simple in that sense. Because there are very few, folks on boards or within university infrastructure that would say, "No, we're gonna step out of the system." There are no more University of Chicago's that did this back in 1930, whatever. That's one thing. Kevin White, and many of us may have heard this before, but Kevin White, the former AD at Duke, Notre Dame, very smart guy. Kevin said something that I think is very, very interesting. He said, "You're going to be chasing people who are chasing people." So all of a sudden, the bar is now set. And you know what that bar is? It's at the University of Texas. It's at Ohio State. It's at LSU. It's at the biggest schools that are awash in money. So I've got real concern as a board member trying to be fiscally responsible with the state of West Virginia's money and the money of, and tuition costs and all that. I've got a bit of anxiety that many schools are putting themselves in a position where they're chasing people who are in turn chasing people that may not be financially sustainable, right? And student fees and everything else that falls into the pot. That's challenging. And we've got to be smart about it. Athletics is very important. We all talk about it being the front porch of the school and a great way to create a brand for a university and attract students and all of that. But we're already half sort of pregnant with professionalization in the industry, and we've just got to be careful that we retain some of those boundaries so that we're not spending money where it could be better spent lowering tuition or supporting the academic mission or the research mission. I do think one thing we'll begin to see is a benefit to those big institutions who have healthcare systems. The University of Miami, for example, basically benefited, tremendously from the fact that it had its own University of Miami, Florida healthcare system, same as the University of Florida healthcare system. Those are enterprises underneath the auspices of the institution that, quite honestly, create a lot of value, which means a lot of money. And typically those institutions, the healthcare systems, are tied to the hip with the university. So that may become, in this new world of ours, an advantage. Think about the Minnesota Vikings owning what's the big hospital up in Minnesota, the Mayo Clinic. Wouldn't that be a great asset to have? And the answer is heck yeah, particularly in this new environment. So there's all sorts of strange things that are sort of happening, I think, with the industry. But to me, there should be some anxiety and some trepidation amongst trustees of the schools and presidents that we've got to do this in a reasonable way. Let's not just chase somebody who's in turn chasing somebody else, because that bar is awful high.
Well, let's drill down a little bit on. You had a comment? No, please.
No, I was just going to say, I wanted to just point out, Oliver talking about the healthcare system, and one of the comments Elise made earlier about this, there's great opportunity right now because we don't know what the future holds. There's going to be, I think the opportunity is just great creative thinking, forcing institutions of higher learning to ask, why do we have college athletics? And if we do, what does that look like? How do we create more efficiency and resources? How do we do things differently? How do we align with our mission, vision, values, and stuff? So anyway, I just wanted to point that out because I think it's a really important and interesting point for the future of college athletics.
And I wanted to drill down on just that a little bit more and think about this money, and everybody can kind of remove themselves from their specific institutions if you'd like to kind of go through this exercise. I mean, it struck me with I'm Stanford alum, and Stanford got this big $50 million gift the other day, the biggest gift ever to athletics. The next day, the Wharton School actually got a $60 million gift, oldest business school in America, and it was the largest gift they'd ever received. And a lot of the conversation I had with folks, yeah, 50 million, that's good for 2 years of the profit share. And it struck me kind of as we're saying two different things. First, what else could these dollars be spent on, and have we seen people making those kinds of decisions? Have there been some really good decisions that you've seen? It's still early so far. When these options are there, do we try to outbid the next bidder, sort of anticipate what's going to happen in the portal, that sort of thing? Or do we do something, here we are with the Drake group kind of thinking, do something that's in the best interest of student athletes more broadly, and that would be this? And what kinds of things are we seeing as arguably some new money comes in, but no number seems big enough now to me. I mean, it's like you got this added line on your budget that you can spend. Well, where are you going to get the money from?
And I'll say two things: that philanthropy hasn't slowed down; it's picked up. The University of Kansas received a $300 million gift, which I think was their largest gift ever, from a gentleman named David Booth. So that won't slow down. But one thing we should perhaps talk about, or at least acknowledge, is big time college sports doesn't have a revenue problem; it has a cost problem. Is every penny that's come in over the last 15, 20, 30 years, every incremental dollar that's come in has been spent. Coaches are now making lots of money. We're paying players now, of course. The facilities are unbelievable when you walk around the top, 150 schools. The support staff, whether it's nutrition, mental health, strength and conditioning, they're better than what players receive at the professional level. So it's really not a revenue problem. We can continue to get philanthropy and donors and all this sort of stuff, folks with naming rights, et cetera. But we've got I think an inability to control costs. Show me a school where there's been sufficient cost containment, and I'd love to learn about it, because as I look around, I just haven't found them yet. Everybody, as soon as they get a dollar, they spend it.
Yeah, two comments I'd love to add. One is from philanthropy side of things. As Oliver said, things are not slowing down, and I used to get that as the AD all the time when you're working with your development office and fundraising and donors and all that. Your biggest donors to the to athletics are generally the biggest donors to the university as a whole. Like that is a shared thing. People are not, the money that they give to athletics is not, they're not sitting there and saying, I have 20 million, I might give it to athletics or I might give it to the, it's just not really how philanthropists generally work. So I don't think there's necessarily that competition within as much. But the other point I wanted to jump off on what Oliver said, and there's a fundamental problem with the system of college athletics that leads to athletic directors are incentivized to spend every dollar that they bring in. They're incentivized to do it. There's no reason not to. In the professional leagues, they're incentivized to bring, they have profit owners. They have people who are expecting they have investors, and it is a for-profit organization. In a nonprofit organization, every dollar you raise, you spend on your purpose. That is the intent of the money coming in, is that you spend to the purpose. So we have this confliction of a social sector enterprise that intercollegiate athletics is part of in higher education, with these multi-billions of dollars in a business model with conference commissioners incentivized to raise money, athletic directors incentivized to raise money. So we have to fundamentally find a way to get to the cost issue, because I 100% agree with Oliver. We do not have a revenue issue. We have a significant cost issue.
And Sandy, just to add to your point, in the professional leagues, your biggest line item, if you're a team owner, team president, your biggest line item is labor, and that's capped, right? The NFL's got a salary cap, NBA, MLB, they're all a little bit different, but it's capped. So your biggest expense, you can't exceed that. And then everything else is really just your front office staff and your stadium costs and all of that. And so, you're right. The profit motive has shown that it can limit the amount of money spent. We don't have that in college athletics at all. And certainly over the last 15, 20, 30 years, cost containment just hasn't existed to the benefit of a lot of people. ADs, like we were, Sandy, coaches, certainly now players, staff people. Some of the staffs on the sidelines are just more. It's like a 1-to-1 ratio between coach or strength coach or nutritionist and the 85 or whatever number of players are on the sideline.
Yeah, I was at a power institution, left for 11 years to be AD, came back in consultancy work, and their budget was $100 million more, but they were still facing the same issues. You know what I mean? That's not specific to that institution at all.
That's right. And in terms of the fracturing, though, those are problems, Tiffany, you're not facing, I don't think, right? At that magnitude, right? And so, it's almost as if there are institutions that have grown either out or sideways, if you will, of the current governance model, and trying to keep all of those underneath that umbrella is just extraordinarily difficult.
So, Elise and Tiffany, so with this in mind, and I also want to know if anybody has any good feel for how people are spending. Is it, initially there were these AI models on here's what will go to football, here's what will go to basketball and women's basketball, and here's what will go to the other sports, and it was pretty formulaic in some ways. But I talking to people, I get the feeling that's not what's happening. So I do want to come back to that. How's the actual spend happening? But the other piece tied to this is the transfer portal and opportunities that develop there in terms of some movement that may not have happened before this, and what kind of use of these dollars might be made by Morgan or in terms of UMBC, your contemplation of getting involved in this. Where's the potential lower hanging fruit or opportunities in the transfer portal to improve athletic programs? So, Elise, why don't we'll start with you this time.
Well, from our perspective, the transfer portal really hasn't changed a lot. Obviously the transfer portal window for football has a huge impact for us, because now that window is significantly smaller, and it gives our coaches little more of a challenge, or you could look at it as a challenge or an opportunity, depending upon if your glass is half full or half empty in that process, where they've got to put in some long hours in that short period of time to sort out who's coming in. But I do think of this is my personal opinion. I look at the transfer portal no different than investments. You have a very short window of time to figure out what's going to be that best fit for you in a number of spaces in that transfer portal. And because you have a short window of time and the impact can be so significant, there's not a lot of room for misses in the transfer portal. You, at this point, the coach is only going to have those 15, 14 days to figure out if student athlete 1, 2, 3, or 4 is going to be a good fit, whether they're on their first, second, third, fourth, fifth transfer. Is that going to be a good fit? Do they have enough time to truly vet out that prospect and how they're going to come into the institution? Morgan's not recruiting with cash. We're not offering $1 million deals for you to come to Morgan State. So if that prospect is on the hunt for money, that does possibly help coach kind of navigate and trim out who's truly available. But it's really about investment. Who is going to be the best fit for me? Who am I going to be able to invest in to get the most out of? And who's going to be the best representative for Morgan State and as an institution and our athletics program in a very short time period, where previously there were multiple windows for football in particular with the transfer portal. But this time, with it going into this year being a very short window, it's tough. But I think our coaches are going to have to approach it very seriously, like they approach investments. Is this a risk I'm willing to take? Or is this a risk I'm going to have to pass on because the stakes are so high with this one-shot deal to get the right fit into your program to help your program either academically, athletically, or just within the community structure and campus structure, not having the flexibility of having a miss, but looking at it as investment.
So Tiffany, as you talk about this issue, I can imagine, I guess to some degree, coach pressures like, we can make another run in the tournament if we can go after one player. So in making your decision to opt in and go forward, I mean, what kinds of things do you think about? How does the transfer portal play into your decision making about being engaged in this?
Yeah, if we weren't thinking about it, we all be crazy because I literally was just speaking with a coach out on the West Coast a couple hours ago, and we were just talking about transfer portal and how out of a 15-person roster, um, 10 of them are brand new players.
Mm.
And then they lost 3 players to power institutions this past year. It's not just affecting, it's not just affecting the powered schools or the mid majors. It's our new world. And then until we realize and start calling the thing a thing, like it's not going to stop. We're not going to put that toothpaste back in the tube, whatever, all the terms, it's just not going to happen. This is our world and we have to adjust in it. I shared a couple months ago, the job I accepted in July of 2024 is no longer the job that I have now. And if you think that the experiences that you have had in the past are all great, however, it's mandated that you find new skills to navigate where we are now. And you've got to get in the game and play it just as everyone else is. So sitting back and waiting for it to happen to you, um, no. Let's just don't do it. Get in the game and play. Um, but even specific to UMBC, yes, we didn't opt in for our reasons, but I do think if we're going to be that team that continues to make the runs in the tournament, not just even in men's basketball, but men's soccer. We've had some great historic experiences there in men's lacrosse, men and women's lacrosse. We've had experiences all over our sport. So if we're going to continue to do those, we got to play. And that's part of that going back to the beginning, not to repeat, but we have to educate our donors. We've got to educate our faculty and staff, our community members. If you're not ingrained in your chamber of commerces in your town, so you can make sure that everyone understands that the times have changed, and here is how you can impact. Here is what it looks like for you now to create impact on our campus. So yeah, it looks different for us, but it's now. It's like this is the now. So let's get rid of that past thinking and move into the future, because this is where we are, and it's going to be fun. It's yes, it's going to stress us out a little bit while we're navigating it, but I mean, let's be honest. We keep coming back every day to do it over and over again. I mean, we can't get Oliver to retire, for God's sakes.
So, so I want to, my head explodes trying to think. Good thing about being a professor and not hands-on with this stuff. I can just think about all these issues. I was really looking forward to this conversation to hear how real people are dealing with this in the moment. So the other piece of the equation, which we haven't directly brought into this, is the third party NIL and how that comes into play. So is Sandy and Oliver, as you talk about this transfer portal and the GM type people in these athletic departments now that are figuring out how to make these spins, just to focus on the transfer portal, how is spending work? How much are people tending to have reserves for the transfer portal? Are they relying on NIL? I mean, how's operationally, how's this really going?
The
And I
trade,
know we haven't had the full cycle yet, but how's it look
yeah.
like? Yeah.
Well, just like Tiffany said, the transfer portal itself is part of recruiting. That changed a number of years ago. So coaches have changed the way they recruit. Like it's not just looking at those young pups and where they're coming up from and maybe a JC here and there. The transfer portal is a fundamental part of the recruiting process. They're watching it all the time, they're assigned to it, etc. The mid majors are just a proving ground for great athletes that are now being plucked out. Like that is not what the transfer portal or NIL was intended to be, right? But is it a recruiting inducement now? Well, it's hard to say that it's not. Fundamentally it's changed, it's here, it's real. And yes, their GMs are a new position. There are capologists that are being hired in, seriously, titles like that are fundamentally becoming part of this equation. So are they setting money aside for this or that? Not sure how people are allocating, although it has to be allocated across the board in all forms and facets of recruiting. And at high major programs, your best identified talent is in other programs, right? Because they're showing you what they can do at the 4-year level. So it is unfortunately part of it. It's a real thing, as I think Tiffany said best. And I would just add to, like, look out for UMBC, who's really staying firm and thinking about things this way with this kind of mindset, because that's the reality of creating the future. The team that gets to plan B first wins the championship. Like you never win with plan A, right? So figuring it out, understanding, studying the system, and staying in it with a mindset that this isn't happening to us. We're going to sit and be victims, which a lot of people are doing, or you're going to get front and center, figure it out, be aggressive, be assertive in how we do it. And much like what Tiffany, I think, is demonstrating really well, keep your both feet grounded in your mission, vision, values, but stretch your neck out there and figure it out, be innovative, be thoughtful, because it is the world we're living in. It's not like a maybe at this point.
I'll just add 3 quick little points. Number 1, tampering, what we would all consider tampering, is rampant. Just understand that, and that's part of the new world. And that won't be, quite honestly, looked at or policed just because there's so much of it at this point. Number 2, even those schools with the full rev share 20.5, they have to pay the right athletes. So it's a two-part step. You can get the money, and for some schools, it's a challenge to get the money. But even if you have the money, you still have to pay the right guys. So that means you have to act like an NFL team if you're a football program, or an NBA team if you're a basketball program. You can't have a coach who says, "Hey, I've got 3 or 4 quarterbacks in my quarterback room. We're going to let them kind of play through spring ball, see who emerges, who gets the confidence of the rest of the team, and who can be our starter." No, you've got to choose the best player, who's your quarterback or rush, edge or whatever it would be, and pay those guys, and you have to make the right decisions as you do that. And the third thing, and we've talked about this before, fortune is going to favor the bold, right? Sitting around and waiting and hoping, that maybe you're a great point guard, won't get plucked. That's just not going to work. Anybody who's an all-conference player at a mid-major level, or even at a group of 5 level in the football world, that person is a massive flight risk, because the other schools, the big schools that have the money to offer them, including what you referenced, Ken, the money above and beyond the cap, the true NIL, or call it whatever you will. Some schools will find another $5 to $6 to $7 million in that category, and that just makes it all the more difficult for schools like Tiffany to keep their star players.
Yeah, Oliver, and I'll add one more to yours. Gambling.
Yeah.
I mean, it's here. It's here to stay. And the closer and closer we get to where our students are able to participate, that red flag continues to go up. So,
Yeah.
but definitely gambling, adding that to the list of 3.
So I want to remind viewers to put their questions into the Q&A. And there's a great one in there now that relates to this, that I wasn't sure if we would actually talk about it, but now it's sounding like we should, because it's about money and where do you find more money? And that's this private equity moment that it's been a pretty long moment of contemplation. And now in the hands of USC and Michigan, maybe it's a reality for the Big Ten. So, we're starting to talk about numbers a little bit. So it looks like, according to the question, $140 million to each school, in additive to their budget if they do this private equity deal. What are people thinking about this whole new, so you can use your resources for the 20.5, you can endeavor in the NIL external third party, and then here's this other non-traditional source of dollars, a budget line. I don't even know how to refer to it properly. It's not really revenue. It's here's some money. In the harshest way, you'd say it's credit. It's a loan in some ways. It has very big back end on it. But what are people thinking about this private equity opportunity to get more money to deal with this?
Well, I'll just say one thing very briefly. The Big Ten, as I understand it, has the most lucrative television broadcast arrangements. And they're getting per capita more, than any other conference. So if the Big Ten legitimately needs more dollars for their athletic department, I'm not sure what that says about the rest of the Power Four, let alone the Group of 5 or Group of 6, whatever the current tagline is. That seems to me to be a question of, why do you want to do this? What really is the need? Is the need for the lower resource schools in the Big Ten? I'll pick on Minnesota, a good program, but not by any means at the top tier of the Big Ten. Does Minnesota want to attach itself with a grant of rights for the next 30 years to the top of the Big Ten? I don't know, but if that's the reason that they want to do this, it seems like you're giving up a good bit when you give away an equity stake. This isn't private capital; this is private equity, and the two are, as we I think all know, substantially different. So I don't know enough about it to know really what the real underlying reason is, but it seems to me we have to tread really, really carefully before we start to allow private equity right? Private capital is a little bit different. That's just somebody loaning money, an institution loaning money. But also, as I think we all know, public schools are able to issue debt-free bonds, assuming that the school has the capacity. They can get fairly inexpensive money, because they're public institutions. So it's something we need to be very, very thoughtful, careful, prudent about, because I know it can open up a little bit of Pandora's box.
I would echo what Oliver is saying, to really be cautious, because private equity is interested in one thing, right? The return on investment. And it goes back to the other thing Oliver said earlier. This is not a revenue issue. It is a cost issue. Like, let's first look at, what are we doing in higher education? How do we, right size this ship, and adding more, return on investment, somebody who financially is looking for a return on investment to piggyback on. I'm really concerned, and as Oliver said, I don't know that much about or understand it enough, but it's of great concern.
Yeah, I mean, private equity in a vacuum, the kind of Wharton School hallway conversation is you find an asset, you try to extract as much as you can from it, and then you try to get as much as you can when you sell it. Now we have to refine that when we're thinking about collegiate athletic programs, but it is something that's completely different from where this model has been historically, but something that we all may have to contemplate it at some point, that these conferences can be viewed as assets, and the drama has been trying to figure out, well, how do we really get money out of these things?
Well, and it's
And to be fair,
oh, go ahead, Oliver.
I was just to say, to be fair to Tony Petitti and the Big Ten, the entity was Big Ten Enterprises, which is all the commercial business of the conference. So that's a little bit different than selling, a share of your stadium or whatever, right? So yeah, they're trying to,
which has been
very
contemplated by
deftly,
some, right?
yeah,
right.
they're trying to very deftly, create a commercial entity that looks very much like a professional sports organization. So I want to be fair. I like Sandy, don't really know all the details, and I think something like this, the devil really is in the details.
Sure.
Yeah. And just really cautious to not disconnect. College athletics is a public trust. It's part of the social sector, of our, United States, and to not disconnect, its purpose from that. So anyway, I know there's a lot of, and this is kind of the bottom line of all of this. It's incredibly complex, right? These issues are very, very complex. And to have really great thought leaders spend some time thinking about them, and, having solutions for the future is key.
So, or at least with athletes at your institution, experience with NIL Go, any that have submitted that you've engaged with them on, and any insights on how that's operated? There's certainly been reports of the overall reporting, but in the day-to-day, if somebody has the smaller deals, the deals I've been happy to get in my day.
So I'll just say Morgan's not dealing with the NIL on the level of the Power Four, the next five, the next group. We have a few student athletes that have opportunities, but the state of Maryland has a baseline. Any deal, it must be reported. So our student athletes who had small deals prior to the House settlement were already reporting their deals to us because of the state requirement that any NIL deal has to be reported. So for our student athletes, they've got to get above that $600 threshold to report to NIL Go, and we're just not really in that. We're just not in that space. So their reporting is still consistent with what it's been since Maryland instituted the reporting requirement about 4 years ago.
Related to this, the other thing that I saw that was out there was, as I was kind of studying up for this, is this the College Sports Commission doing this deal with Real Response to allow allow people to report when there's a violation, when people are not reporting their deals. I almost use the word snitch, but that would not be appropriate for us. Um, in any conversations about that, or any thoughts about that? Because this whole, all these things, it's about how do you regulate, how do you actually enforce? And I will say that personally, that struck me when I saw the announcement that there was this partnership. I said, something just doesn't feel exactly, I don't know, in the spirit of things the right way. But I don't know. But any thoughts on that?
I'll
think-
just, oh, go ahead, Elise,
Okay.
please.
I think anytime you give an individual an opportunity to voice their concerns, their displeasure within the space, and they can be somewhat anonymous in their reporting, I think it opens up the door to the dialogue. I don't know necessarily that there's gonna be a huge rush to go through it. Coaches talk about the tampering, they talk about the deals that are offered. If we have a student athlete that's here today, then poof, poof, they're gone in a couple weeks to a Power 4 institution or to a higher level institution. Our coaches talk about it, and they talk about there should be something done about it. But at the same time, they don't want to be the coach that walks through that door to say, I'm going to report it. I would be curious to see how many are actually utilizing the quote unquote anonymous service to report the claims and the challenges that they're having. I'm not sure that the numbers are going to be as large as the public may think with the media, the way it's been presented in the media. I think the public thinks it's rampant and coaches are all of a sudden going to start turning on one another and reporting them. But I would be curious to see that as well, how many coaches walk through the door and actually report on the tampering that's taking place.
Okay, that's helpful. I think we're all going to watch and see how that plays out going forward.
And if I could just add something, it's somewhat related, but not directly on point. But in the old system, when Sandy and I were ADs, there would be all these NCAA committees, and they would make a decision about X, Y, or Z, a very specific decision about a specific fact pattern, and that decision would be shared with Division One, for example, or Division Two, Division Three. And compliance officers would say, okay, here we know if we have the situation at our campus, we know what the rules should be. So that was fairly efficient in sharing that information with the full membership. And what seems to me to be very inefficient is the current system where people just don't seem to know, or at least students don't seem to know what the parameters of a deal could look like what's likely to be approved, what's not going to be approved. And it seems like there's just a lot of activity going on without there being any sort of information or precedent that is shared with the larger campus, or the larger membership. And that just seems to be a waste of a lot of people's time by continuing to apply for things that will get rejected immediately because of X, Y, or Z.
Yeah, that's helpful. The other thing that I want to talk about, and then I want to get to some of the great questions that have been delivered. But please insert more, and we're going to go through those for the last portion of our conversation. Roster caps, and I think broadly the idea, and there's a kind of a movement out there about this idea of a broader opportunity for high school kids to continue to play. And a lot of these, speaking of private equity, there's a lot of private equity money going into youth sports.
Mhm.
And a lot of those people are putting into the public discussion this issue of maybe schools should look more to these opportunities with these dollars that they have to have broader based, not above club sports, but some JV opportunities, these sorts of things, so that more people can play. And the idea that's one of the things that held up actually the House settlement was this whole idea of roster caps and grandfathering people in and all that sort of thing. How is that playing out? And how are you thinking about this whole idea of this does get to that whole dichotomy of the schools that we're talking about, kind of the differences that are there. The opportunity to play, this whole idea of the greatness of college sports versus, as a couple of you have said, the professionalization of it. And the people in the tip of the pyramid are the ones that are playing, but that base, your opportunities are gone unless you're a star. So what are we seeing in terms of student opportunities and the way this seems to be flowing, and what we've seen in the first few months of where we are?
I would say from Morgan, we're status quo from the transition from last year into this year, because the student athletes who had an opportunity to be grandfathered in until they exhaust their eligibility. So I think same thing with investments. Coaches are going to be more intentional with their recruitment moving forward to make sure they're getting the best fit they can for their programs. But I think going after this first year, we'll start to see the dynamics change with the roster limits, because 25, 26, no programs really had to cut anyone. You had to make a determination. Are they in your main roster, or are they going to be on your designated list, so that they did not lose the opportunity? But moving forward, I think it changes the landscape of recruitment a little bit. And coaches are more intentional in their processing because they don't have an unlimited number of roster spots. They have a very finite number. And as the debate continues over, are you going to have 4 years? Are you going to have 5 years to compete? Coaches are in that waiting game to see, well, is it going to be this year that my athletes will get 5 years? Is it going to be next year? And it's, to some extent, it does create some confusion with the process. At least from our perspective, we have athletes that call us every day. Hey, did I get that extra year? Am I going to get an extra year? Coach is asking, so who am I recognizing on senior day? Does this student have another opportunity to play next year? Is the 5-year rule coming into play? But as far as the transition from 24, 25 to 25, 26, pretty much status quo, because the student athletes were grandfathered in. What's going to be the big telltale on the roster limit success, and if it's going to create this subsystem within the Division I structure, is going to be going into 26, 27, and how the rosters are managed. And our waivers filed now to expand into this subsystem of the primary program, but now we have the secondary program that begins to emerge to give student athletes opportunities.
One other thing I'd add, again, time will tell how some of these things impact long term. But there have been for years conversation with women's basketball. Should we reduce from 15 scholarship to 13 scholarship to create more parity, right? So that the more talented people aren't sitting on a roster someplace that could play maybe at the next, growing level. So it'd be interesting now that football's at 105. You can't have 125 or 250 or something. You can't have big rosters. So it'll be interesting to see how some of that potential could potentially create some greater parity. On the flip side, there are many institutions, even in Division I, that are, sport is a revenue driver. I mean, excuse me, tuition revenue driver, right? It's bodies on campus that are important. And so limiting those spots impacts some institutions greater than others. So as I've talked to some institutions where they would have that are enrollment driven, very, competitive Division I programs that still have that enrollment driver component of it. It's like, well, can we do some different things with our rowing that we haven't done in the past so that our overall bodies in intercollegiate athletics are staying the same while my numbers have to come down in some other sports? And in some sports, whether things like wrestling and soccer, particularly on the men's side, those are rosters that tend to get really, really big. 34 athletes on a wrestling roster, and you compete 10 at a time. So it's interesting. I had those conversations as an AD or was part of them, when I wasn't in the top seat about, do you really need that many kids on that roster? You know what I mean? Like, can't we get that thing down to a more reasonable number for Title IX purposes, for overall cost efficiencies? So I think it impacts different schools differently, and it'll be very interesting to see how it impacts our industry.
Yeah.
I'll just say two brief things. Number one, my alma mater, West Virginia, added 140 scholarships. And I think that was the right move, approved by the board, and
Awesome.
I think that's going to help us. Second thing is this, though. I think all of you would appreciate this. The new roster limits were set by whom? They were set by a bunch of lawyers during the settlement discussions. And I'm a lawyer myself, but my colleagues don't necessarily know what the best ideal roster number is for volleyball or softball or wrestling or whatever. So I'm not, for example, West Virginia, we moved from, what was it, 10.8 baseball scholarship, I think was the limit, up to 28. The new limit is 34. 34 is a lot of full scholarship baseball players because, as we all know, only 9 can play at one time, even with an extended pitching staff. So I'm not sure the numbers were the most sensible numbers because they basically came out, Ken, as you know, of a settlement room, with a bunch of lawyers who probably were interested in getting home from work for that day. So, there wasn't much science behind the new roster limits.
Yeah, and I think the one other element to inject in thinking about this, and I can remember when it first struck me, um, coming from the Pac-8 to the Ivy League, just the number of sports that these Ivy institutions play, for example, and when it was 30 to 40 back in the day, without scholarships, that this tuition model that people talk about, there is something there, this idea of you can financially drive this thing with those dollars, but the contemplation hasn't taken place in the way that it needs to yet, and the numbers are not the right numbers now in terms of thinking about how to do this, and everybody doesn't have to get paid to play. How do you best work with that kind of model to make it happen? So let's go to some of the questions. I'll just go to them, and we'll trust the grammar of people that put these together, and I'll just say on here. Uh, start off with this one because this kind of relates to where we were in terms of opportunity to play. What are some ways we can prepare high schoolers with a dream of playing the collegiate level to understand and cope with all these changes? Because recruiting landscape looks so different, it often is trickling down to impact these high school athletes. So thoughts on that? What should, or are there obligations on the part of our institutions to think more about these high school athletes in terms of recruiting, and with the NCAA taking a whole different role in this space?
Yeah, Ken, I'll jump in there real quick just
Yeah.
to say, if you are an educator or a coach or someone that has an opportunity to share with prospective student athletes, I would say open their mind to all of the levels of NCAA competition, so that they really understand. I think folks see what they see on ESPN and they run with that's the only way. But there are so many levels to college sport that are now being they're a lot prettier now that we have this opportunity for students to get some money, but I think there are students who are still focused on the academics. They're still focused on things that are outside of athletics that's important to them. So I think just as someone who just loves higher education, there are students who still believe in the mission of universities and what it's intended to do. So if you do have those students, make sure that you're you're talking about all of the levels and all of the things that could affect them as as a person. Because as a former Division I power student athlete, the ball stopped bouncing for me, and understanding what did life look like once that ball stopped bouncing. I was still able to have an amazing career. I was able to go to graduate school. I was all have all of these things in front of me, outside of a uniform. So I think it's still important that we remember, well, I'm gonna be honest, just to keep the main thing, and that's education.
No, thank you. So here's another one. As another revenue raising strategy, what do the panelists think about earmarking a federal tax on sports betting towards collegiate Olympic sports? If it happened, who would you want in charge of distribution, and how would you want the revenue distributed? That which kind of again this we'll keep dancing around the role of the NCAA in the world now and going forward. And maybe we should insert too in the conversation the College Sports Commission and you know who should be doing this. But the first part first, and Tiffany, you mentioned betting, so maybe you want to take a first shot at thinking about let's phrase it in the best way, using the revenues from that betting for good. How about that?
I'm here for using gambling money for good. Let's do it. We've been using the lottery for higher ed for how long? So why not throw sports betting in the game? And then I'm gonna be honest, having an opportunity to work in the University of North Carolina system, that did also something similar, not for rev share, but just for institutions that were not power institutions to receive money from sports betting, and being an institution who received some of that money and was able to do some transformational things, whether it be around facilities and scholarships for students, it could be huge. Now, I have no clue who is supposed to be in charge and how they distribute it. I'm sure, as Oliver would say, another room of lawyers who will decide that too. However, I definitely think it's something to put on the table. If we're throwing it all on the wall, let's do it. Because if we're going to use it for good, I'm here for it.
I'd love to piggyback on that too, because in terms of using it for good, really infrastructure, as you've talked about, right, supporting athletes and their development and their mental health and go on. And also targeting those sports that may be most at risk for funding. These are real decisions that athletic directors have to make right now about where their resources going to go and how. And so if those monies could be directed towards collegiate Olympic sports and really help beef up support that area, don't know again who or how that might happen, but to do it in a way that really supports collegiate Olympic sports, not meaning Olympic movement only, because collegiate sports plays two roles: quality in providing opportunity for young people to grow into professional opportunities in sport or Olympic medals, but most importantly is the broad-based system that that blue disc in particular plays, and that's in the growth of the sport and the youth and high school levels and the growth of the sport. So how do we find monies that would protect that space? That's where I would be jumping up and down voting for.
The good news about gambling, if there is any, is that data can really help suss out if there is actually a game that's being thrown, right? It's very difficult in the old-fashioned, model to investigate something like that, but with data and those opportunities, you can at least provide some potential leads. When games that are easy to throw, like basketball, right? You can kick the ball out of bounds or bounce it off your knee or miss a free throw, and who knows the difference? But data should be able to help, and I think that's a proper role for the NCAA to engage in, as they already are.
Yeah, and the Knight Commission actually did a little bit of research to find there's actually a federal tax currently on gaming providers. So it's not on individual games or betting on a game, because, you know, prop bets and all of that, like putting more pressure on athletes and winning and losing and what have you, but simply on the gambling providers, right? And then actually added that into a D1 leader survey that we conducted, in a different hat I wear with the Knight Commission, and showing that the public would be interested in helping to fund potentially collegiate Olympic sports through a tax that could be earmarked in that way. But how would that be distributed and by whom would be a very interesting conversation.
So the two questions, if I was in a classroom, I would ask, and I'm not going to ask them now, is who is in charge and who will be in charge in the future? Let's not press on that. And the other one would be, if you had your choice, and as professor, I can limit it to your choice, gambling money or private equity money, which one would you go? Okay, but we're not going to do that. Let's go to Donna has a compound question for Oliver. So Oliver, if you haven't pulled it up, I'm going to read it to you. Others can feel free to assist Oliver, because there are multi-parts to this. If Congress conditioned an antitrust exemption on the imposition of expenditure mandates, would athlete medical/mental health and Title IX compliance be top two on your list? So we haven't really talked about federal legislation. Um, there's an or to that. Or what else? Alston Academic Awards, hopefully tied to desired outcomes. We'll take that first part first.
Yeah, I haven't read the question, but just thinking about it very quickly. If Congress said, "Hey, big time college sports, you know, we're going to give you an antitrust exemption, but in return, we want a expense cap, if you will, in terms of, I guess, salaries for coaches and all the other expenses." I don't know if I can say what should be in there. I would think, though, generally speaking, if there is an expense cap, you would want to, with that deal that would be done, that bargain, you'd want to protect the sports that are usually not protected, which are the Olympic sports. You know, football is king, and will continue that will continue to be the case. Basketball is very popular both on the men's and women's side. Then you have baseball and softball and a few others. But I think it's those Olympic sports that one would need to protect if in fact there is some kind of an expense box that every school has to live within.
Any other comments on that before I read the second part of the question?
I would just say, for me personally, I would want the exemption in the Alston space, because we are talking about academics. We're talking about graduation. If you truly are giving Alston funding with the intended purpose for which it was created, that should be exempt, because you're not necessarily going to have a perfect proportionality or resourcing for that. But when we're talking about college athletics, the main part of that is the academic mission of the institutions, and the current tax exemptions surround the academic mission, and that the individual is a true student. I would say the Alston funding and funding that's specifically earmarked for academics should be able to preserve some level of an exemption.
The second part, second, with regard to expenditure controls, should we strictly limit numbers of coaches/staff members, or cap aggregate coach salary/benefits? Should conference structures be prohibited from scheduling regular season play travel more than 2 time zones, for example, for regular season play?
Well,
Well, I
didn't we already
think
try that once before? Limiting
we tried
coaches.
limiting coaches' salaries. You know, that didn't work. We do, though, have a limit, for example, in football, on how many people can be on the field as active coaches. You know, so there
Not
are
anymore.
some sort of competitive limits that one could argue would make some sense. Somehow, if there is an expense cap, you know, there'll have to be some tough decisions made. You know, I mean, if there's any sport that's ballooned in terms of the staff, it's basketball. I mean, there literally is a 1-to-1 ratio of, you know, adults on the bench along with the players. And that just seems to be a little bit excessive. There's probably more assistant coaches than an NBA team may have. So, and I haven't given much thought. You know, others can dig in, but there would have to be some pretty tough decisions made. I will say, on the flip side, and this often gets lost, the quality of play in college football, and I think college basketball, men's, women, and some of the other sports that maybe I don't watch as much, is unbelievably high. I mean, the athletes are better than ever. The coaching, I think, is better than ever. The competitiveness is better than ever. And the TV ratings, at least for those sports that are shown on the major networks, are better than ever. So clearly, the American public values what they see when they watch, LSU take on Clemson or whatever the match may be, because the quality of play is so much better than when you and I played back in the day.
Yeah, for
I think
sure.
as it relates to expenditure controls, also thinking about not just the coaching staff, but expanding athletic training and some of the areas that's taking a really big hit from a salary standpoint, I don't know about everybody else, but it's so hard to find and retain athletic trainers because of the schedule and the mandate on their time, that they're able to go to clinics and make twice their salary and work from 8 to 5 and have their weekend. So I think thinking outside of the coaching staff, but the support staff around sports teams.
So let me just go a couple more of these, and then I want to give everybody a chance to close out kind of with parting thoughts on best practice advice uh, going forward. So the second to last question, are you able to say anything at this point about the increased vulnerability and necessary safety measures for the athletes, given the increased money, sports betting, etc.? Um, how are athletes doing in this new environment?
I have no idea, but I would say that I do think a danger is, and I think all of us who were college athletes would know this. There's a lot of pressure on a young man or woman coming in, trying to figure out school and personal life, and then whatever sport you're playing. So the fact that you're receiving money for that as well adds a layer of pressure, and that's tough when you're 17, 18, 19 years old, and the expectations arise as well. The expectations are higher because money is involved. So that's a pretty tough message right off the bat when you're walking out of a high school system where it was still a lot of fun. You have your buddies, your friends, et cetera. So I think that those increased expectations, that increased pressure, will probably at the end of the day result and manifest itself in additional mental health concerns.
I would also add, I was with a Power Four position coach, football coach 2 weeks ago, and he made a comment that he shared with me that one of his athletes is going to make about $300,000 a year in his position, and that he got his first check and he came into him and said, "Coach, they didn't take the taxes out." Now, they're getting education, but how much is landing? And, so there's real implications of the money coming into the system right now and the 18 to 22-year-olds being prepared and managing that. Two is they're going to have to, most of them will leave college system not signing a big bonus and going into making, hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars. They're going to have to take a $70,000 job, or whatever it is, become a normal college post-grad. And so that, and then you couple with the locker room issues and how much people are making in the locker room and all those kinds of things. So I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying, again, we're in this system of change right now where doubling down, focusing on the mental health, the expectations, the real knowledge and education of these young people who are, this is shifting for all of them, is really critical, really important. And I hope people are really emphasizing that on their campuses.
So the last one I would take from this, and then again, give each of you a minute to kind of give us your parting thoughts. Given the demands of money on a player's time, will athletes take their classes exclusively online instead of a traditional in-person class presence on campus? Further, with frequent athlete transfers via the portal, will they be able to obtain a degree within a reasonable amount of time? So a few people have asked versions of that question.
I'll make a super quick comment. COVID changed the way higher education is delivered. And so taking all your classes online is already happening. Like it's not happening for every student athlete for sure on every campus, but those options are already there and people are already taking advantage of them. So I think that's already there. And certainly, again, in this new shift and changes, a really strong focus on academic, the academic pathway for athletes is more critical than it's ever been.
Yeah, I would agree that COVID did change higher education significantly, where the majority of the classes offered were seated. But keeping in mind that not only did students have a reluctance to come back into the classroom, but the faculty teaching those classes, for whatever reason, whether it was age, comfortability, had a reluctance to come back into the classroom. So as a result, it was right to offer more of an online platform for education. And so a student being able to take classes online happens more often than not when you look at the scheduling that's available and the frequency of a particular department program trending towards online because they may have more adjunct versus full-time faculty for their own personal sustainability to offer some very unique programming. So we've gotten to a stage now where that's the traditional sociology, psychology, accounting degrees, the young people, excuse me, coming to higher education aren't really looking for that cookie cut standard degree program. So institutions are getting more creative in how they're offering classes and the topics that are being offered so that it's not just computers, but it's cybersecurity, it's little niche areas. And in an effort to be able to offer those platforms, you have a lot more non-traditional opportunities for instruction. So as a result, there are more online offerings. And when you talk about a young person who's transferred 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times, keeping in mind the change in higher education following that COVID, or really during COVID, institutions began to offer more non-traditional degree programs that oftentimes a young person who was in business management or they were in a social work area, they can transfer that first time and probably stay in that cookie cut major. Third time, now they're flexing and trying to find change. When they transfer again, now they're into a hybrid program where a lot of institutions are offering more of a hybrid educational platform where you're not getting that cookie cut degree, but a non-traditional, more exploratory degree that offers you the opportunity to get the business, to get sport, to get sociology, whatever it is you want to craft in your degree program. That's more common now than it was pre 2020. So there are opportunities for students to still get degrees, but at the same time, as opposed to just the transferring in those first 3 years, because of the emphasis on education with programs, and they want the summer workouts or they want to get that jump start. A lot of our students are coming in having a significant number of college credits. So they are able to progress faster. So if they transfer multiple times, they're not really behind, but they have that bachelor's degree in 3 years. So now they're going to graduate school or they're doing something different. But I think it's very possible to have the multiple transfer and still stay within the academic mission of the institution and college education.
All right, we're going to go with one sentence. I was going to go one word, one sentence closing thought, reverse order from how we started off. So Oliver, your one sentence send off to folks.
I think the best thing that I could say is what Elise said at the very beginning. You cannot have a rigid mindset if you are in college athletics. You have to be flexible and open literally to everything. Look at how the pros operate in certain areas. So that open, totally open mindset is critical, I think, for success.
Thank you. Tiffany?
Lead with the mission and not the money. That's
Thank you.
Mhm.
Elise?
Be nimble, be able to pivot and have an open mindset, but stay true to your core values and the values of your institution. Because if you stay with your core values, you'll never be wrong.
Amen.
Ken, I will finish with one word: ditto. Well said. Leadership matters, and they just gave the pathway. So
All right. Well, thank you. We didn't set that up like that, but thank you so much. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for our guest for conveying so much information, and for everybody with all your questions, which I understand will be answered. Those that we didn't get to, but think about these young people as you move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken.
thanks, Ken.